So for a while now, I've wanted to make a procedural fracturing system because I feel like self-fracture in Blender is really bad, and I've just done it. So it's fully procedural, it's made in geometry nodes. Let me show you how it works and how to make it. So here we have a cube. As we hit play, you can see it's getting fractured, and here you can see the individual fragments. This system works with any kind of mesh, so let me add in a UV sphere, or you can bring in your own mesh, and I just want to show you that it works, and then we can get to it. So here we have a sphere, it's getting fractured, and notice that these fractured segments have like uneven things, that they're not like perfectly clean slices. That's going to be a thing too. So let me show you how to make this thing. It's actually pretty simple, and uses simulation nodes. If you don't have that, make sure you're on 3.5. Go to geometry nodes, take your mesh. I'm gonna have mine be a cube and make that a geonodes group, and here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna make a plane that cuts this in half and use a mesh boolean to kind of segment it, and then we're gonna repeat that over and over and over again on individual fragments. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in a grid. I want my grid to be bigger, and I want it to be distorted if we want kind of like unclean cuts. So I'm going to use the set position node. I'm going to offset this with a noise texture, set to color, and by adding in more geometry on both axes, you can see it's getting distorted. I only want this to be on the z-axis, so I'm going to multiply this only on the z-axis, and then I'm going to center it by subtracting by 0.5. Okay, so now we have a uneven grid, and I'm going to make the distortion lower. So this is before and after. Next, I want this to have some thickness, so we can actually do a boolean, so it needs to have some kind of volume to it. So I'm going to do an extrude mesh, not set to individual, so this actually has thickness now. And to make sure that this thing is a sealed mesh, I'm going to join this with the original. Take the first input and flip the faces so that all the faces are facing the same way, and then we're going to merge by distance. So what this is going to do is it's going to make this an airtight mesh that we can control the thickness of. So something like this. So now we have our grid, we have our mesh, and all I want to do is cut one from the other. So I'm going to use a mesh boolean for this, and this is the key idea. So making sure it's set to difference, you do this, and you can see you have a cut. Another key insight is if we don't actually need to access any of this. I'm just going to make it a node group. So this is our grid. If we were to take this and transform it, either by moving it up or by like rotating it, you can see we can move where our fracture is going to be. So at this point, all we have to do is repeat this process without adding in a bunch of mesh booleans. That would be silly. Instead, I'm going to use simulation nodes. So simulation output, simulation input. So again, this is basically a loop that is time dependent. I'm going to input my initial mesh, which is a cube. So what we have right now is we have a cube going into the simulation and spitting out the same thing, and we want to do the boolean inside of here. So not much is going to change. I'm just going to add a mesh boolean inside of here. So every frame I want it to cut away this node group. So if we go to the first frame and click play, you can see it's getting rid of it, but then it's kind of doing some weird stuff. So what we want to do at this point is have a different plane on each frame. To do this, we can rotate this by a random value. So we can have it go from like -3 to 3, so each one's going to have a random rotation. And this rotation, you're going to see this link isn't working because it's rotating every point. I want it to rotate the general mesh. Make sure the ID is set to either a single number, which is going to get this to work. So you can see now, if I play this, it's now doing the same thing but on a different axis. Or what I want this to do is rotate it by a different thing for each frame. So I'm going to use frame as the ID. So you can see it's doing a cut and a cut and a cut and a cut. And it's almost working, but it's a bit glitchy. Okay? But you can see it's doing multiple cuts in different directions. Now, the question is, why is this kind of, breaking away? The answer is Blender's mesh boolean isn't perfect. So it's better, instead of applying a boolean over and over and over again to this mesh, we apply it to parts of the mesh, to different islands of it. So imagine we make a cut, and now we have one section here and one section here, and I can say pick one and do the cut to that. In other words, we can look at the mesh island. So the mesh island is saying, which island are we looking at? I want to pick a random island. So of the total number of islands, the island count, I want you to pick between 0 and the largest option, -1, since the indexing starts at 0. And we're going to see where the island index is equal to our random selection. So in other words, we're going to look at the island index. We're going to pick a random one between 0 and 1 minus the maximum. So pick a random island. We're going to see which of these are equal to each other. So which island is equal to the random one. And of this one, do the mesh boolean to that. So a way to explicitly do that is we're going to separate geometry by the selection. And we're going to say do the boolean to the selection, and then for everything that wasn't booleaned, just join it in at the end. So let's see what this looks like. So now, now it doesn't seem to like that either. And I think the issue here is kind of the same issue we had before, where we're selecting random values for each point, or I guess in this case we're talking about islands, but again for each point, we want the ID to be kind of set to a set amount. So again, we had this frame to randomize our rotation ID, and now we're going to also use it for our island chooser ID. So now when we click this, you can see it's doing a bit better. It doesn't seem to be perfect, like it is cutting away parts of the mesh, but I think an easy way to solve that is we just change the seed value and find one that works. So I'm going to have a parameter for the seed value, so I'm setting it to 1 instead of 0. Doesn't seem to like that. Click these check boxes here. It's still kind of a glitchy setup, but I found that it works a bit better. There we go. Now we're getting nice fractures. So you just got to find a seed value that works for you. And basically every frame it's gonna add an additional cut to one of these islands, which is gonna make it not as glitchy. So now, if we go like, I don't know, 30 frames down, all we have to do to see these fragments is we scale elements, and you can see here are the individual fragments that make the thing. Now, if you just want to run a Voronoi, I'm just clicking play, making sure the thing doesn't break. You send it to a certain amount. I think at this point you can just hit apply, and now we have this fractured mesh that we can control. We can select a piece of it, and you can see the chunks that make up the Voronoi fragment. So it's not really a Voronoi fracture, even though I'm calling it that, but there you go. That is how you do it. And I just want to mention at the end here, if you want to get this blend file so you don't have to make it yourself, it's going to be available on Patreon. There's a link in the description. And I want to say thank you to all the nearly 700 active patrons that are letting me run this channel and CG Matter at the same time, available for free. So that is going to be available in the description, or Patreon in the description. You get the idea.